I stared at the text message from my parents, reading it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Watch your sister's wedding online, link attached. My younger sister Chloe was marrying Derek at Sunset Ridge Manor, the exact venue I dreamed of using for my own wedding before everything fell apart last year. The family had chosen Chloe's 6-month engagement over acknowledging my 3-year relationship that ended badly when my ex cheated. When Chloe called 30 minutes later, her voice was sharp and demanding. "Brianna, promise me you won't ruin this for me by showing up and making a scene." I held my phone staring at the live stream link they'd sent, like I was some distant acquaintance instead of her sister. My finger hovered over the RSVP response. I clicked cancel on my attendance. I thought I'd feel empowered taking control. Instead, I felt completely abandoned by the people who should love me most. The notification sound from Instagram made me look up from my laptop where I'd been trying to focus on work. My mother had posted another update about Chloe's upcoming wedding this time, showing off the custom floral arrangements that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. The caption read, "We made our princess's dreams come true at Sunset Ridge Manor." Princess. That word had followed Chloe her entire life while I'd been the responsible one, the backup plan, the daughter who figured things out on her own. I scrolled through the wedding planning posts my family had been sharing for weeks, each one a painful reminder of how differently we'd been treated our whole lives. Chloe got piano lessons at age 7, while I worked at the neighbor's farm collecting eggs for $5 a week. When high school came around, Chloe's college fund was already fully established, while I filled out scholarship applications and worked 3 part-time jobs to avoid student loan debt. Even our cars told the story. Chloe drove a brand new Honda Civic that our parents bought for her 16th birthday. I inherited Dad's 15-year-old pickup truck with a broken air conditioner and a radio that only picked up AM stations. Now living 800 miles away in Denver, where I worked as a marketing coordinator, I watched my family pour money into Chloe's fairy tale wedding, while my own student loans remained untouched. I'd asked for help exactly once 2 years ago when I was struggling to make rent after a medical emergency. Dad had lectured me about financial responsibility and suggested I find a roommate. But for Chloe's wedding, they'd somehow managed to cover a $12,000 venue fee, professional photography that cost another $4,000 a live band instead of a DJ, and gourmet catering for 200 guests. The math didn't add up until I saw Uncle Robert's comment on Mom's latest post, "So proud of you both for taking out that loan to make this happen." Alone. My parents, who'd refused to co-sign a $5,000 car loan for me 3 years ago because it was too risky, had borrowed $40,000 to fund Chloe's one-day event. The discovery hit me like cold water. They'd gone into debt for her dreams while lecturing me about living within my means. I closed Instagram and tried to return to the marketing campaign I was developing for a local restaurant chain, but concentration felt impossible. Every few minutes, my phone buzzed with another family member posting about their excitement for the upcoming celebration. Cousin Jenny shared a photo of her new dress. Aunt Sarah posted about her flight to Portland. Even my 70-year-old grandmother had learned to use Facebook just to share wedding countdown posts. Everyone was invited. Everyone except me, the sister who'd helped Chloe with homework throughout high school, and listened to her cry over every breakup she'd ever experienced. The woman who'd driven through a snowstorm last Christmas to bring Chloe medicine when she had the flu because our parents were too busy with their own plans. Now I was reduced to a live stream viewer watching from my apartment like a stranger. The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd excluded me from the guest list, but still expected me to tune in online as if my attendance through a computer screen somehow counted as family participation. They wanted me present enough to witness their success, but distant enough not to complicate their perfect narrative. I was supposed to play the role of the happy sister who cheered from afar, grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion they offered. My phone rang, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. Mom's contact photo appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but years of trained obligation made me answer. Brianna, honey, did you get our message about the live stream? Her voice carried that artificially cheerful tone she used when she wanted something but didn't want to admit it. I got it. Wonderful. The ceremony starts at 4 o'clock Pacific time, so that's 6 your time. You'll love seeing how beautiful everything looks. We spared no expense to make this special for Chloe. No expense. The word stung because we both knew she meant they'd spared no expense for Chloe, specifically not for family celebrations in general. My own college graduation had been marked with dinner at Olive Garden and a card with $50 inside. I'm sure it will be lovely. Oh, it will be. The florist said our arrangements are the most elaborate she's done this year, and wait until you see Chloe's dress. We found it at this exclusive boutique in downtown Portland. The designer usually only works with celebrities, but she made an exception because Chloe is so stunning. I listened to her gush about details that each represented more money than they'd ever spent on anything involving me. The photographer was award-winning. The cake came from a bakery that required a 3-month waiting list. The string quartet had performed at the governor's daughter's wedding last spring. I'm really happy for her. I managed, though the words felt like broken glass in my throat. I know you are, sweetheart, and I know you understand why we had to keep the guest list small. Weddings are so expensive, and we wanted to make sure we could afford to do everything perfectly for Chloe's special day. Small guest list. 200 people was small. Every cousin, aunt, uncle, and family friend had made the cut except for me, the bride's only sister. 3 days before Chloe's wedding, my phone started buzzing constantly with messages that felt like coordinated attacks on my conscience. It began Tuesday morning with a long text from Mom that appeared to have been carefully crafted to hit every emotional pressure point possible. Brianna, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'm deeply disappointed in your attitude about this wedding. Chloe is your only sister, and she's getting married once in her lifetime. Family loyalty should matter more than whatever petty disagreements you think you have with us. Your absence will be noticed by everyone, and people are going to ask questions about why you're not there. What am I supposed to tell them? That my eldest daughter is too selfish to celebrate her sister's happiness? Before I could process that message fully, another one arrived from Dad, shorter but somehow more cutting. Your mother is heartbroken about this situation. We raised you better than this. Family comes first always. Figure out a way to be there. Then the extended family members started reaching out one by one as if they'd been assigned to wear me down through sheer volume. Cousin Mark called during my lunch break at work asking why I was being difficult about attending. Cousin Jenny sent a Facebook message expressing confusion about my sudden decision to skip such an important family event. Even relatives I rarely spoke to began texting each one, making me question whether I was making the right choice. My grandmother called Wednesday evening while I was heating up leftover takeout in my small apartment kitchen. Her voice was fragile and confused the way it got when family drama upset her. Brianna, dear, your mother told me you're not coming to Chloe's wedding. I don't understand what's happening between you girls. When I was young, sisters supported each other no matter what. Are you fighting over something silly? Can't you just apologize and move on? Listening to my 82-year-old grandmother plead for family unity while clearly not understanding the full situation made my chest ache. She'd raised 5 children during the Depression and couldn't comprehend how parents might exclude one child while favoring another. In her world, families stuck together because survival depended on it. It's complicated, Grandma. Nothing is too complicated for family, sweetheart. I'm worried that you're letting pride get in the way of love. Chloe needs her big sister there. You've always been the mature one. Can't you be the bigger person? After she hung up, I sat on my couch feeling like the worst granddaughter in the world. Maybe I was being petty. Maybe attending the wedding would be the right thing to do regardless of how hurt I felt about being excluded from the planning and treated like an afterthought. Maybe family really should come first even when family didn't seem to prioritize me. Thursday brought a new wave of pressure this time from Chloe's friends who'd somehow gotten my phone number. Brittany, Chloe's maid of honor, called to express concern about family drama affecting the wedding day. Madison sent a long text about how excited Chloe was and how much it would mean to have her sister there. Each message made me feel smaller and more selfish for caring about my own feelings when everyone else seemed focused solely on Chloe's happiness. The final blow came Thursday evening when Aunt Sarah called. Unlike the other family members who'd been dancing around the issue, Sarah was direct. "Brianna, I need to tell you something, and I hope you won't get angry with me for being honest." My stomach dropped because Aunt Sarah only used that tone when she was about to deliver devastating news. "Your parents have been talking to everyone about why you're not coming to the wedding. They're not just saying you can't make it or that you're busy with work. They're telling people you're too selfish and jealous to attend your own sister's wedding. They're saying you've always been bitter about Chloe being prettier and more successful and that you can't stand to see her happy." The phone felt heavy in my hand as Sarah's words sank in. Not only had my parents excluded me from their daughter's wedding, but they were actively destroying my reputation within our extended family. They were rewriting history to make me the villain in a story where I'd simply asked to be treated with basic respect and inclusion. They're telling everyone you've always been jealous of Chloe's achievements and that you're probably angry about your own relationship failing last year. Cousin Robert said your dad told him you've been unstable since the breakup and that they're worried about you causing a scene. Unstable. The word echoed in my head long after Sarah hung up. My parents were not only justifying my exclusion, but painting me as mentally unfit, using my personal struggles as ammunition to protect their narrative. The breakup they mentioned had happened when my ex-fiancé cheated on me with a coworker, something they'd known about but never offered much support for beyond telling me to focus on moving forward. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every family interaction from the past year. Had I missed signs of their true feelings about me? Had they always seen me as the problem child, the disappointment, the sister who couldn't measure up to their golden daughter? The evidence seemed overwhelming. My exclusion from the wedding wasn't an oversight or a budget constraint. It was a deliberate choice backed by a calculated campaign to justify that choice to anyone who questioned it. Saturday arrived with unseasonably warm weather for early October in Portland. I knew this because I'd been obsessively checking the forecast all week, wondering if Chloe's outdoor ceremony would go as planned. Despite everything that had happened, part of me still cared about her day being perfect. That complicated mix of hurt and love had kept me awake most of Friday night, wrestling with whether to watch the live stream at all. At 5:55 Mountain Time, I found myself sitting on my couch with my laptop open, the wedding live stream loaded and ready to play. I'd told myself I wouldn't watch, then convinced myself I'd just check in briefly, then admitted I couldn't resist seeing what my exclusion had bought them. The production quality was impressive. Multiple camera angles showed the venue from different perspectives, the altar decorated with white roses and baby's breath, rows of elegant chairs filled with guests in their best attire, and a view of the surrounding gardens that looked like something from a magazine. Sunset Ridge Manor was everything I'd imagined when I'd browsed their website years ago, back when I thought I'd be planning my own wedding there. The main building was a restored Victorian mansion with wraparound porches and floor-to-ceiling windows. The ceremony was taking place in their famous rose garden, where an archway covered in climbing flowers framed the altar. Even through the computer screen, I could see why people paid premium prices to get married there. The guests looked exactly like what I'd expected from my family's social circle. Aunt Linda wore a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Uncle Robert had on a suit that actually fit him properly, unlike the ill-fitting ones he usually wore to family events. Cousin Mark and his wife Rachel sat in the third row, and I could see Rachel's new jewelry sparkling in the late afternoon sunlight. 200 people had gathered to witness Chloe's marriage, including neighbors from our childhood street family friends I hadn't seen in years, and what appeared to be Derek's extended family, filling up the left side of the seating area. The live stream chat was disabled, so I couldn't see comments from other online viewers, but the production felt professional enough that I wondered if they'd hired a company specifically to broadcast the event. At exactly 6 o'clock, the processional music began. A string quartet played something classical and beautiful, while Derek's groomsmen walked down the aisle in matching charcoal gray tuxedos. Derek himself looked nervous but handsome, standing at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and athletic build. He kept adjusting his tie and checking his watch, which I initially interpreted as normal groom jitters. Chloe's bridesmaids followed, each wearing a different shade of blush pink that created an ombre effect as they walked. The dresses were clearly expensive, probably chosen from some exclusive boutique that required appointments and personal consultations. Brittany, the maid of honor, carried a bouquet of white peonies that must have cost $200 by themselves. Then came Chloe, escorted by our father, and I had to admit, she looked absolutely radiant. Her dress was everything she'd ever dreamed of, a ball gown silhouette with intricate beadwork that caught the light with every step, a cathedral-length train that flowed behind her like liquid silk, and a veil so delicate it seemed to float rather than hang. Dad looked proud enough to burst his smile wider than I'd seen in years. For a moment, watching them walk down the aisle together, I felt genuinely happy for my sister despite everything else. The ceremony proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. The officiant, a family friend who'd known Chloe since childhood, spoke beautifully about love, commitment, and building a life together. Derek and Chloe exchanged personal vows that made several guests dab at their eyes with tissues. Everything looked perfect, exactly the fairy tale wedding my parents had spent $40,000 to create. Then, the officiant reached the traditional moment that every wedding includes, but most people consider a formality. If anyone has any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now, or forever. Hold your peace. The pause that followed should have lasted 3 seconds at most. Instead, it stretched into an uncomfortable silence that made the camera operator zoom in on Derek's face. He looked pale suddenly, scanning the audience with an expression I couldn't quite read. Before I could process what was happening, a woman's voice cut through the silence like a knife. I have something to say." The camera swung wildly as someone in ripped jeans and a black tank top stormed down the center aisle, pushing past guests, who turned to stare in shock. The woman was about Chloe's age, with dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail and fury written across her face. She waved a stack of papers in one hand and held up her phone with the other, shouting loud enough that the live stream audio picked up every word clearly. "Derek Williams owes me $15,000, and he's been cheating on Chloe for the past 4 months. I have the text messages, the bank statements, and photos that prove everything." The guest section erupted into gasps and confused murmurs. Someone near the back shouted, "Security!" But the woman kept walking toward the altar, undeterred by the chaos she was creating. "His real name is Michael Thompson, and he's been lying to this entire family about who he is and what he wants. Chloe, I'm sorry to do this here, but you deserve to know the truth before you sign that marriage certificate." The livestream camera operator seemed frozen, unsure whether to cut the feed or keep rolling. The woman reached the front of the ceremony space and turned to face the seated guests, holding up her phone to show the screen. "These are text messages from 3 weeks ago where he told me he couldn't wait to get access to Chloe's family money after the wedding. And these bank statements show charges to strip clubs and gambling websites using credit cards that aren't his." Derek stepped forward, his face red with anger or embarrassment, and tried to grab the papers from her hands. "Amanda, you're insane. This is harassment. Someone call the police and get her out of here." But Amanda had clearly come prepared for his denials. She stepped away from his reach and continued speaking to the crowd, her voice carrying across the garden. I'm not insane, Michael. I'm the woman you've been sleeping with while planning your wedding to this poor girl, and I'm tired of watching you destroy people's lives for money. The live stream camera shook as the operator tried to decide whether to stop filming or capture the unfolding disaster. Through the chaos, I could see my mother rushing toward the altar area, her face a mixture of horror and desperate damage control. Dad followed behind her, gesturing frantically at what must have been venue security staff gathering near the edge of the garden. Derek grabbed Amanda's wrist, trying to pull the phone from her hand, but she twisted away and held it higher so more guests could see the screen. Her voice carried clearly over the confused chatter of 200 people who had expected a peaceful ceremony and instead found themselves witnessing what appeared to be the exposure of a massive deception. Show them the pictures, Amanda, Derek hissed, but his attempt at intimidation backfired when she immediately started scrolling through her phone's photo gallery. You want me to show them the pictures? Fine. Here's you and me at the Marriott downtown 2 weeks ago. Here's you at the casino last month using what you told me was Chloe's credit card. And here's my personal favorite, you passed out drunk in my bed the night after you proposed to her. Several guests stood up to get a better view while others pulled out their own phones to record the confrontation. I realized that within minutes, videos of this disaster would be spreading across social media platforms, turning my family's expensive wedding into viral entertainment for strangers. Chloe stood frozen at the altar in her beautiful dress, holding her bouquet with white knuckles while her fairy tale wedding crumbled around her. The expression on her face was heartbreaking confusion, giving way to dawning horror as Amanda's accusations began to make sense. I could see her mind working connecting dots she'd probably been trying to ignore for months. Those pictures are fake, Derek shouted, but his voice cracked with panic rather than righteous indignation. She's a stalker who's been harassing me since we broke up. None of this is real. Amanda laughed, a bitter sound that cut through the garden air. Stalker, you texted me yesterday asking if I wanted to meet up after your honeymoon. You said married life was going to be boring and you'd need some excitement on the side. She held up her phone again, apparently scrolling to find the message she'd referenced. Several guests gasped as they caught glimpses of the text conversation. Even from my laptop screen 800 miles away, I could see people in the front rows leaning forward to read what she was showing them. My mother reached the altar and tried to physically insert herself between Amanda and the wedding party, speaking in the artificially calm voice she used during family crises. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. This is a private family celebration and we need to ask you to leave so we can continue with the ceremony. But Amanda wasn't intimidated by Mom's practiced diplomacy. Mrs. Patterson, your daughter is about to marry a con artist who's been stealing her identity to open credit cards and take out loans. He owes money to dangerous people, and he's planning to use your family's assets to pay his debts. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is me trying to save Chloe from making the biggest mistake of her life. The words hung in the air like a challenge that nobody knew how to address. I watched my father's face cycle through emotions, anger at the disruption, confusion about the accusations, and growing concern as he processed what Amanda was claiming. Around the garden, guests sat in stunned silence, some still holding their phones up to record, while others seemed too shocked to move. Derek made one last attempt to control the situation. Security, please remove this woman immediately. She's clearly unbalanced and trying to ruin our wedding out of jealousy. But when he looked around for backup, the security staff seemed hesitant to physically remove someone who was making specific accusations about criminal activity. Amanda took advantage of their hesitation to address Chloe directly. Chloe, I know this is horrible and I'm sorry it's happening on your wedding day, but check your credit report. Look at your bank statements from the past 6 months. Ask him why he needs access to your family's financial information so badly. Ask him why he's in such a hurry to get married when you've only been engaged for 6 months. For the first time since Amanda's dramatic entrance, Chloe spoke, her voice barely audible, but clearly picked up by the live stream microphones. Derek, is any of this true? The question was simple, but it carried the weight of their entire relationship. Derek's response would either validate Amanda's claims or prove her wrong. The garden fell silent, except for the sound of wind moving through the trees and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Derek opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He looked at Chloe, then at Amanda, then at the crowd of guests who were all staring at him expectantly. Finally, he spoke in a voice that sounded nothing like the confident groom who'd been standing at the altar 20 minutes earlier. It's complicated, Chloe. There are things you don't understand about my situation. It wasn't a denial. It was an admission wrapped in justification, and everyone present seemed to recognize it as such. Chloe's bouquet slipped from her hands and fell to the ground, white flowers scattering across the grass. The sound of her sharp intake of breath was clearly audible through my laptop speakers. That's when my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed my mother's contact information, and I realized that despite everything that had happened between us, despite being excluded from the guest list and painted as the family problem I was suddenly needed. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message at the same time. Brianna, you need to come to Portland right now. Chloe is asking for you, please. Then another message arrived from Dad. Emergency. Can you drive up here today? Chloe locked herself in the bridal suite and won't talk to anyone except you. I stared at my phone, processing the irony of the situation. For months, I'd been the sister who was too problematic to invite. Now suddenly, I was the only one who could save their golden child from the consequences of their poor judgment. The family who had excluded me was begging for my help, admitting that despite all their efforts to minimize my importance, Chloe still trusted me more than anyone else. Through my laptop, I could see the wedding ceremony dissolving into complete chaos. Guests were standing up and talking among themselves, some heading toward the parking area while others seemed determined to stay and see how the drama unfolded. Amanda was still showing her phone to anyone willing to look, while Derek argued with venue security about having her removed. My parents looked like they were trying to manage a natural disaster with their bare hands. And somewhere in that beautiful venue, my sister was apparently having a breakdown so severe that she'd specifically asked for me, the sister they deemed too unimportant to include in their perfect day. I closed my laptop and reached for my car keys. The drive from Denver to Portland normally took 12 hours, but I made it in 10, stopping only for gas and coffee while my mind raced with questions about what I'd find when I arrived. The mountain roads twisted through Colorado and into Utah, giving me plenty of time to replay the live stream disaster and wonder what role I was supposed to play in cleaning up the mess my family had created. By the time I reached Sunset Ridge Manor, the sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the parking lot that had been full of wedding guests just hours earlier. Now only a few cars remained, my parents' silver sedan, what must have been Derek's black BMW, and a white van that probably belonged to the catering staff, cleaning up the abandoned reception. The venue looked like the aftermath of a tornado. Folding chairs sat in disorganized rows where guests had left them when the ceremony fell apart. Flower petals were scattered across the grass, and I could see abandoned programs and tissues blowing around in the evening breeze. The beautiful archway that had framed the altar still stood decorated with white roses, but it looked sad and purposeless now, like a movie set after filming Wrapped. I found the bridal suite on the second floor of the main building, following directions from a sympathetic venue coordinator who looked exhausted from dealing with the day's chaos. The hallway was quiet, except for the sound of muffled voices coming from behind a heavy wooden door marked with an elegant brass nameplate reading, Bridal Preparation Room. I knocked softly and the voices inside immediately stopped. Chloe, it's Brianna. I drove up from Denver. The door opened so quickly that I suspected she'd been waiting right beside it. My sister stood there, still wearing her wedding dress, but it looked nothing like the pristine gown I'd seen on the live stream. The intricate beadwork was dulled by tear stains. The cathedral train was wrinkled and dirty from trailing on the ground, and her veil hung crooked across her shoulders like a broken wing. But it was her face that made my chest tighten with sympathy. Her makeup had been carefully applied by professional artists that morning, but now mascara streaked down her cheeks in dark rivulets. Her lipstick was completely gone, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked like a little girl playing dress-up in an outfit that had become too heavy to wear. "You came," she whispered, and threw her arms around me with a desperation that caught me off guard. I held her while she sobbed against my shoulder, feeling the expensive fabric of her dress crumple between us. The bridal suite around us told the story of a day that had started with hope and ended in devastation. Makeup brushes and hair products covered the vanity table. Empty champagne glasses sat abandoned on side tables. Wedding shoes lay kicked off near the window, and tissues were scattered across every available surface. "I'm so sorry," Chloe said when she finally pulled back to look at me. "I'm sorry about the wedding invitation, and I'm sorry about what Mom and Dad said to everyone about you. I heard what they were telling people, and it wasn't true. None of it was true." I guided her to the small couch near the window and sat beside her, careful not to step on the train of her dress. For the first time in years, my sister looked at me without any pretense or competition, just raw vulnerability and genuine regret. "Tell me what happened after the live stream cut out." Chloe took a shaky breath and wiped her face with a tissue smearing what remained of her makeup. "Derek tried to convince everyone that Amanda was lying, but then she showed more evidence. Text messages where he called me naive and easy to manipulate. Bank statements showing he'd been using credit cards that weren't his. Pictures of him with other women at places he told me he'd never been." She paused, staring down at her hands, which were still trembling slightly. The worst part was watching everyone's faces when they realized she was telling the truth. Grandma looked so confused and hurt. Uncle Robert got angry and started demanding answers about Derek's background. And Mom and Dad just kept trying to convince people that we could work through this privately, like it was just some minor disagreement that could be fixed with family therapy. I reached over and took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the warm evening. "When did you know she was telling the truth?" Chloe's face crumpled again, and for a moment I thought she might start crying too hard to continue. But she composed herself and met my eyes with a directness that reminded me of the little sister who used to tell me everything. "I knew before today, Brianna. I've known for months that something was wrong, but I was too scared to admit it. Derek started staying out late without explanation about 3 months ago. He'd get phone calls that he'd take in another room, speaking in whispers like he didn't want me to hear. When I asked about it, he'd say it was work stress or family problems, but the explanations never quite made sense." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where her wedding ceremony had fallen apart. "Then there were the money issues. He was always short on cash, but somehow had expensive clothes and went to expensive restaurants. He asked me for my social security number and bank account information, saying he wanted to add me to his insurance policy, but when I called the insurance company later, they had no record of any application." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how calculated Derek's deception had been. "Why didn't you call off the wedding?" Chloe turned back to face me, and her expression was a mixture of shame and fear. "Because Mom and Dad had already spent so much money. $40,000, Brianna. They took out a loan against the house to pay for this wedding. They invited 200 people. The deposits were non-refundable. Everyone was so excited and proud, talking about how perfect everything was going to be. I felt trapped by their expectations and their investment." She sat back down beside me, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "And because I was scared that if I called it off, I'd never find anyone else who wanted to marry me. Derek made me feel like I was lucky that someone like him would choose someone like me. He said I was too dependent on my family and too naive about the world, but that he loved me anyway. The manipulation was so clear from the outside that I wanted to shake her, but I could see how someone inexperienced with relationships might fall for it. Derek had systematically undermined her confidence while positioning himself as her rescuer. Is that why you asked Mom and Dad to invite me? Because you were hoping I'd object? Chloe nodded, fresh tears starting to fall. You were the only person I trusted to tell me the truth, even if it hurt. Everyone else was so invested in the wedding being perfect that they wouldn't have listened to my concerns. But I knew that if something was really wrong, you'd say something. When they told me you weren't coming, I realized I was completely on my own. I felt a surge of anger at my parents for putting Chloe in such an impossible situation, but also a deep sadness that she'd felt so isolated and trapped. You're not on your own now. She squeezed my hand and managed a small smile for the first time since I'd arrived. I know. That's why I asked them to call you. Even after everything that happened with the guest list and the things they said about you, I knew you'd come if I really needed you. You always have. We'd been talking for about 20 minutes when heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the bridal suite. Chloe tensed immediately, recognizing the sound before I did. The footsteps were accompanied by male voices, at least 3 or 4 different people speaking in urgent, hushed tones. A sharp knock rattled the door, followed by Derek's voice calling through the wood. Chloe, we need to talk. Open the door. Chloe shrank back against the couch cushions, shaking her head frantically. I can't face him right now. I don't know what to say. Before I could respond, the knocking became more insistent and Derek's voice grew louder. Chloe, this is ridiculous. We can fix this if you'll just listen to me. Amanda is a psychotic stalker who's been harassing me for months. Everything she said was either lies or taken completely out of context. Another voice joined Derek's, one I recognized as his brother Jake from the wedding party introductions I'd seen on the live stream. Come on, Chloe. Derek's been going crazy with worry about you. Just give him 5 minutes to explain what really happened. Then a third voice, deeper and more aggressive. We're not leaving until she opens this door. This whole situation is insane and it needs to be resolved tonight. I stood up and walked to the door, speaking loudly enough for them to hear me clearly. Chloe doesn't want to talk right now. She needs time to process everything that happened today. Derek's response was immediate and sharp. Who is that, Brianna? What are you doing here? This is between me and my wife. Fiancé, I corrected. And I'm here because Chloe asked me to come. Jake's voice came through the door next, trying to sound reasonable and diplomatic. Brianna, we understand this has been a difficult day for everyone, but Derek and Chloe love each other, and they just need to work through this misunderstanding privately. Why don't you let them talk it out? The third voice, which I realized belonged to one of Derek's groomsmen, added his perspective. This Amanda woman is clearly unstable. She's been stalking Derek for months, trying to break up his relationship because she's jealous that he moved on. Everything she said today was fabricated to hurt him. I looked back at Chloe, who was listening to their explanations, with a mixture of hope and doubt crossing her face. Part of her still wanted to believe that Derek's story could be true, that the man she'd planned to marry might actually be the victim, rather than the perpetrator. Derek must have sensed her wavering through the door because his voice became softer and more pleading. Chloe, baby, I know today was scary and confusing, but you know me better than anyone. You know I would never hurt you or lie to you about something this important. Amanda is sick, and she's trying to destroy our happiness because she can't accept that our relationship is over. The manipulation was so smooth and practiced that I wondered how many times he'd used similar tactics to gaslight Chloe into doubting her own instincts. He was positioning himself as a wounded party while painting Amanda as an unstable ex-girlfriend, creating a narrative that would allow Chloe to dismiss everything she'd heard at the ceremony. Jake tried a different approach. Look, we know this isn't the wedding day anyone planned, but marriages face challenges, and couples who really love each other work through problems together. Derek made some mistakes in how he handled his ex-girlfriend situation, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love Chloe with his whole heart. The pounding on the door resumed more insistent than before. Chloe, please, I'm not leaving until we talk this through. We can reschedule the ceremony for next weekend. Everything can still be perfect if you'll just give me a chance to explain. That's when I heard a different sound from the hallway, someone else approaching the group gathered outside our door. A woman's voice spoke up, authoritative and professional. Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm Janet Morrison, the venue coordinator. I need to inform you that we've found something that belongs to one of you. Derek's voice immediately became wary. What kind of something? A wallet that was apparently dropped near the altar during this afternoon's incident. The housekeeping staff found it and brought it to the front desk. The identification inside shows the name Derek Williams, but there are also several cards with different names. The silence that followed was telling. Through the door, I could hear what sounded like a whispered argument between Derek and his companions. Janet continued her voice, carrying the polite but firm tone of someone who dealt with difficult situations before. I have the wallet here if you'd like to claim it. There are also some papers inside that appear to be important. Just leave it outside the door, Derek said quickly. I'll get it later. I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. Our policy requires that lost items be claimed in person with proper identification. You'll need to come to the front desk to verify your identity before we can return your property. More whispered conversation followed, then the sound of footsteps moving away from the door. Jake called through the wood one more time. Chloe, we'll be back. Don't let anyone convince you to make any permanent decisions while you're upset. After the voices faded and the hallway became quiet again, I turned back to Chloe. That was interesting timing. She nodded, looking thoughtful. Derek never loses his wallet. He's obsessive about keeping track of his money and cards. If it fell out during the ceremony, he must have been really rattled by Amanda's accusations. Should we go see what's in it? Chloe hesitated for a moment, then stood up with more determination than I'd seen from her all evening. Yes, I think it's time I learned the whole truth about who I was planning to marry. We made our way downstairs to the venue's front desk where Janet Morrison was waiting with a black leather wallet that looked expensive but worn. She greeted Chloe with professional sympathy. I'm so sorry about what happened during your ceremony today. I've been coordinating weddings here for 15 years and I've never seen anything quite like that. Janet handed over the wallet after Chloe identified herself as Derek's fiancé. The housekeeping staff found it near where the altercation took place. Some of the contents had fallen out, so we collected everything and put it back inside. Chloe opened the wallet with trembling fingers, and I watched her face change as she examined the contents. She pulled out Derek's driver's license, first confirming it showed his name and photo, but underneath it was another license with the same photo and a different name, Michael Thompson. Next came credit cards, 3 of them bearing Derek's name and 2 with names I didn't recognize. Then business cards for a payday loan company, a debt consolidation service, and something called Quick Cash Advances, with a phone number written in Derek's handwriting. At the bottom of the wallet, folded small and tucked behind the other items, was a photograph that made Chloe gasp out loud. It showed Derek kissing a blonde woman at what appeared to be a bar or club, both of them laughing and clearly enjoying themselves. The woman wasn't Amanda, which meant Derek had been involved with at least 2 other people while engaged to Chloe. But the most damaging piece of evidence was a handwritten note, apparently Derek's own writing with a list of what looked like talking points: family has money, parents will co-sign loans, wedding, what access to accounts, and keep her dependent and grateful. Chloe stared at the note for a long moment, then carefully folded it and put it back in the wallet along with everything else. Well, she said quietly, I guess that settles the question of whether Amanda was telling the truth. The walk back to the bridal suite felt like a funeral march. Chloe moved slowly in her wrinkled wedding dress, clutching Derek's wallet like evidence in a criminal trial. We'd barely reached the second floor when we encountered my parents coming down the hallway, their faces a mixture of relief and barely contained panic. Chloe, sweetheart. Mom rushed forward, reaching out to embrace her daughter. We've been so worried about you. Everyone's asking questions and we don't know what to tell them. Dad followed close behind, his face red with stress, and his tie loosened from what had clearly been a difficult few hours of damage control. This whole situation has gotten completely out of hand. We need to figure out how to fix this before it gets any worse. I noticed that neither of them asked how Chloe was feeling or whether she was okay. Their primary concern seemed to be managing the social and financial fallout rather than their daughter's emotional well-being. Mom, Dad, we need to talk, Chloe said, her voice steadier than it had been all evening. I found some things in Derek's wallet that you need to see. She opened the wallet and began showing them the contents: the fake identification, the credit cards with different names, the business cards for loan companies, and finally the handwritten note with Derek's apparent strategy for accessing our family's financial resources. I watched my parents' faces carefully as they examined each piece of evidence. I expected shock, anger, or at least concern for how close Chloe had come to being victimized by what was clearly a sophisticated con artist. Instead, Dad's primary reaction seemed to be irritation. Where did you get this? Derek's been looking everywhere for his wallet. The venue staff found it near the altar after the ceremony fell apart, I explained. Derek dropped it when Amanda was making her accusations. Mom took the wallet from Chloe's hands and examined the contents more closely, her face cycling through various emotions. When she reached the handwritten note, she read it twice before looking up at Chloe. Sweetheart, I know this looks bad, but we can't make permanent decisions based on one piece of paper that might not even mean what it appears to mean. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, that note literally says, keep her dependent and grateful next to family has money. How could that possibly mean anything other than what it appears to mean? Dad turned toward me with the expression he used when he thought I was being difficult. Brianna, you don't understand the full situation. Derek and Chloe have built a relationship over the past year, and every couple has problems to work through. One bad day doesn't erase everything they've shared together. A bad day. I stared at him in disbelief. Dad, Derek has been lying about his identity, stealing Chloe's personal information, and planning to use her as a way to access your money. This isn't about relationship problems. This is about criminal fraud. Mom stepped between us, her voice taking on the artificially calm tone she used when she wanted to shut down arguments. Let's all take a deep breath and think about this rationally. Yes, there are some concerning elements that need to be addressed. But we've invested $40,000 in this wedding, plus all the deposits for the honeymoon, and we've brought 200 people together to celebrate. We can't just throw all of that away without trying to work things out. The words hit me like a physical blow. My parents were more concerned about their financial investment and social embarrassment than their daughter's safety and well-being. You want her to marry him anyway? I asked, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. Even after everything that happened today, even after seeing evidence that he's been planning to defraud your family, you still think she should go through with this? Dad's face grew redder and his voice rose to match mine. I think that marriages face challenges, and couples who are committed to each other find ways to work through those challenges. Derek made some mistakes in how he handled his past relationships, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love Chloe. Mistakes. Chloe spoke up for the first time since showing them the wallet contents, her voice sharp with disbelief. Dad, he's been lying about his name. He has fake identification. He wrote down a plan for accessing our family's money. These aren't mistakes. These are crimes. Mom moved closer to Chloe, reaching out to take her hands. Oh, sweetheart, I know you're hurt and confused right now, but you need to think about your future. Derek has a good job and a nice apartment. He treats you well most of the time, and most importantly, he wants to marry you. At your age, with your limited dating experience, you might not get another opportunity like this. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Mom was essentially telling Chloe that she was lucky to have attracted a con artist because he might be the best she could do. Limited dating experience, Chloe repeated slowly. Mom, I'm 24 years old. I have plenty of time to meet someone who isn't a criminal. Dad jumped back into the conversation, his tone becoming more authoritative. Chloe, you're being dramatic. Derek isn't a criminal. He's a young man who made some poor financial decisions and got involved with the wrong people. With the right support system, he can turn his life around, and you can be part of helping him become a better person. I realized that my parents had completely missed the point of everything that had happened. They weren't seeing Derek as a predator who had targeted their daughter. They were seeing him as a flawed but salvageable investment in Chloe's future, someone who could be fixed with enough effort and family support. What if she says no, I asked. What if Chloe decides she doesn't want to marry someone who's been lying to her for months? The look that passed between my parents was answer enough, but Dad made their position explicit. Then she'll have to accept responsibility for wasting everyone's time and money, and she'll need to figure out how to pay us back for the wedding expenses since we took out a loan to make this happen for her. The threat was clear: marry Derek or face financial consequences that a 24-year-old with student loans and an entry-level job couldn't possibly handle. They were using their debt as leverage to pressure Chloe into a marriage they knew was dangerous. Mom added her own form of emotional manipulation. And of course, we'll have to explain to the entire extended family why the wedding was canceled. Everyone will want to know what went wrong, and they'll have their own opinions about whether you made the right choice. I looked at Chloe, who was staring at our parents with an expression I'd never seen before. It was the look of someone realizing that the people she trusted most in the world were willing to sacrifice her safety for their own convenience. So you're saying I should marry Derek anyway, knowing what we know about him, because you've already spent the money and invited the guests? Dad nodded, as if this was perfectly reasonable. I'm saying that every marriage requires compromise, and that you shouldn't make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. Derek obviously has some issues to work through, but with counseling and family support, there's no reason why you two can't have a successful marriage. That's when Chloe did something I'd never seen her do before. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and sharp, the laugh of someone who just realized how little her happiness mattered to the people who claimed to love her most. It was temporary emotions, she repeated. Is that what you call learning that my fiancé is a con artist who's been planning to steal from our family? She stood up straighter, and for the first time all day, she looked like someone who knew exactly what she needed to do. By 9 o'clock that evening, our crisis had apparently become a family-wide emergency requiring immediate intervention. I watched from the bridal suite window as cars pulled into the venue parking lot, Uncle Robert's silver pickup truck, Aunt Linda's white SUV, and Cousin Mark's rental sedan. Within 20 minutes, our private family disaster had become a full-scale extended family meeting. Mom knocked on the bridal suite door, her voice artificially cheerful in a way that immediately put me on guard. Girls, everyone's here now, and we think it would be helpful to have a family discussion about how to handle this situation. We're gathering in the main conference room downstairs. Chloe looked at me with exhaustion written across her face. Do we have to? We can say no, I told her. You don't owe anyone an explanation or a group decision-making session about your personal life. But even as I said it, I could hear the sound of multiple conversations happening in the hallway outside our door. Our relatives had driven hours to attend this wedding. Some had flown in from other states, and now they were apparently all gathered to weigh in on whether Chloe should proceed with marrying a man who'd been exposed as a fraud. "Maybe it would be better to get it over with," Chloe said quietly. "At least then everyone will know the full story instead of just hearing rumors and speculation." We made our way downstairs to find the venue's conference room transformed into an impromptu family tribunal. The round table that was normally used for wedding planning meetings was now surrounded by folding chairs occupied by relatives who'd spent their evening discussing Chloe's future instead of celebrating her marriage. Uncle Robert sat at the head of the table like he was chairing a board meeting with a yellow legal pad covered in handwritten notes. Aunt Linda had positioned herself to his right, still wearing her navy wedding guest dress, but looking like she was ready for serious business. Cousin Mark and his wife Rachel sat across from them, whispering to each other and occasionally glancing toward the door where Chloe and I had appeared. Grandma occupied a chair near the window, looking confused and tired but determined to be part of whatever decision was being made. Cousin Jenny sat next to her along with Aunt Sarah and Uncle David, who must have driven over from their hotel after hearing about the day's events. The most surreal part was seeing Derek sitting at the table between Jake and another groomsman, looking like a defendant at his own trial, but still somehow managing to project wounded innocence. He'd changed out of his tuxedo into jeans and a polo shirt, but his hair was still perfectly styled from the wedding ceremony that morning. As Chloe and I took the two remaining empty chairs, Uncle Robert cleared his throat and addressed the group in his most official voice. "All right, everyone, we're here because we have a situation that affects the whole family, and we need to make some decisions about how to move forward. I've been talking to Derek for the past hour, and he's explained his side of what happened today." I felt my stomach drop as I realized what was happening. This wasn't going to be a supportive family meeting where everyone rallied around Chloe. This was going to be a negotiation session where Derek's interests were given equal weight to Chloe's well-being. Derek leaned forward, speaking directly to Chloe with an expression of sincere remorse that might have been convincing if I hadn't seen the contents of his wallet. "Hey, Chloe, I want to start by apologizing for not being completely honest with you about my past. I should have told you about Amanda and about some of the financial difficulties I've been dealing with. But I want you to know that everything I feel for you is real, and all I want is a chance to prove that we can work through this together." Aunt Linda nodded approvingly as if Derek's partial admission somehow absolved him of the more serious accusations Amanda had made. "That takes courage, Derek. Admitting your mistakes is the first step toward fixing them." Uncle Robert consulted his notes and addressed the group like a judge delivering a verdict. "I've been thinking about this situation from all angles, and here's what I think we need to consider. First, Derek has acknowledged that he made some poor choices regarding his ex-girlfriend and his financial management. Second, canceling the wedding at this point would result in significant financial losses for Tom and Margaret, plus social embarrassment for the entire family. Third, Derek seems genuinely committed to making things right and building a good life with Chloe." Cousin Mark raised his hand like he was in a classroom. "I'd like to add that I flew here from Chicago, took 3 days off work, and paid for hotel rooms for my family. We all made sacrifices to be here for this wedding. It seems unfair to waste all of that because of what might just be pre-wedding jitters and miscommunication." Rachel nodded in agreement. "Mark's right. Plus, every relationship has problems. The question is whether Derek and Chloe love each other enough to work through those problems together." I looked around the table in amazement, realizing that most of our relatives seemed to view Derek's systematic deception as a minor relationship hurdle rather than evidence of criminal behavior. They were treating this like a couples counseling session instead of a family safety meeting. Grandma spoke up in her gentle voice, directing her words toward Chloe. "Sweetheart, when I was young, we believed that marriage was about commitment through good times and bad times. If you run away at the first sign of trouble, you'll never learn how to build a strong relationship with anyone." Derek seized on Grandma's words, his voice becoming more confident. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell everyone. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I should have been more honest about some aspects of my past. But doesn't everyone deserve a second chance? Doesn't love mean being willing to forgive and move forward together? Aunt Sarah looked around the table and then addressed Chloe directly. Honey, you're 24 years old. You might not understand this now, but finding someone who wants to commit to marriage isn't easy these days. Derek is here. He's willing to work on his problems, and he loves you enough to want to spend his life with you. Sometimes you have to accept people as they are and help them become better. The intervention was becoming increasingly surreal. These were people who'd known Chloe her entire life, but they were treating her like she was too inexperienced and emotional to make rational decisions about her own future. They were literally voting on whether she should marry someone who'd been exposed as a fraud. Uncle Robert looked around the table, apparently taking an informal poll. So let's see where everyone stands. Who thinks Derek and Chloe should work through this situation and proceed with the marriage, maybe postponed by a week or two to give everyone time to process today's events? Hands went up around the table. Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, Cousin Mark, and Rachel, Uncle David. And after a moment's hesitation, Aunt Sarah. 6 votes in favor of proceeding with a marriage to a con artist. And who thinks the wedding should be canceled permanently? Fewer hands. Cousin Jenny, Aunt Sarah, who changed her mind, and me. 3 votes for protecting Chloe from someone who'd been planning to exploit her family. Grandma abstained, saying she was too confused by everything to make a decision. The final count was 6-3 in favor of encouraging Chloe to marry Derek despite everything that had been revealed about him. Our extended family had just voted to pressure a 24-year-old woman into a fraudulent marriage because canceling would be financially and socially inconvenient. Uncle Robert made the results official. Well, there you have it. The family consensus is that Derek and Chloe should work through this situation together. Marriage is about forgiveness and commitment, and we believe you two can build a strong relationship if you're both willing to put in the effort. Derek smiled for the first time since I'd arrived at the venue, looking like someone who'd just won a legal case he thought he might lose. Thank you all so much for your support. Chloe, I know today was difficult, but I hope you can see how much your family believes in us. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making up for the mistakes I've made. All eyes turned to Chloe, who'd been silent throughout the entire discussion. She looked around the table at relatives who just voted on her marriage, like it was a business merger, then at Derek, who was clearly expecting her to accept their verdict. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. I need some time to think about everything that's been said tonight. It was a diplomatic response, but I could see something changing in her expression. The family's decision to treat her safety as a matter of group consensus seemed to be crystallizing her own thoughts about what she needed to do. After the family meeting broke up around 10:30, Chloe and I returned to the bridal suite while our relatives headed back to their hotels, and Derek went wherever con artists go when their schemes are temporarily interrupted. The venue had become eerily quiet, with only the cleaning staff remaining to restore the gardens and reception areas to their original condition. Chloe sat on the couch, still wearing her wedding dress, staring out the window at the moonlit grounds where she'd planned to marry the man who'd been systematically planning to defraud her family. For the first time all day, she looked calm rather than panicked, as if the family intervention had somehow clarified, rather than complicated, her situation. They actually voted, she said quietly. Our relatives sat around a conference table and voted on whether I should marry Derek. I sat beside her, carefully arranging the train of her dress so it wouldn't wrinkle further. How does that make you feel? She was quiet for several minutes, processing not just the day's events, but apparently years of family dynamics that had led to this moment. Like I'm not a person to them. Like I'm a problem to be solved or an investment to be protected. but not someone whose feelings and safety actually matter. The realization seemed to be sinking in gradually, the way painful truths often do. Even after seeing Derek's fake identification and that handwritten plan for accessing Dad's money, they still think I should marry him because canceling would be inconvenient. Uncle Robert talked about me like I was a business merger that had hit some minor complications but could still be salvaged with proper management. I thought about the family dynamics that had shaped both of our lives, the way Chloe had always been treated like a prize to be displayed, while I'd been treated like a supporting character in her story. I don't think they see either of us as fully independent adults, I said. You're their princess who needs protection and guidance, and I'm the responsible one who handles problems but doesn't deserve the same investment of attention and resources. Neither role allows for us to be complete people with our own judgment and agency. Chloe nodded, finally putting words to something she'd probably felt for years. They spent $40,000 on a wedding, but didn't spend 40 minutes asking whether I was actually happy with the person I was marrying. They care more about their financial investment than my emotional well-being. She stood up and walked to the window again, looking down at the parking lot where a few cars still remained. Derek's still here, she said. I can see his BMW near the front entrance. He's probably waiting to see what I decide, thinking the family vote gives him some kind of legitimacy. That's when we heard the sound of the door handle turning slowly as if someone was trying to enter the bridal suite without knocking. Chloe and I both froze, staring at the door as it opened just wide enough for someone to peek inside. Chloe. Derek's voice was soft, almost wheedling. I saw the light under the door. Can we talk? He stepped into the room without waiting for permission, followed by Jake and another groomsman whose name I hadn't learned. They'd apparently been waiting in the hallway, listening for signs that we were still awake. I've been thinking about everything that happened today. Derek continued, moving closer to where Chloe stood by the window. And I realize I owe you a complete explanation about Amanda and about some of the things she said. Chloe backed away from him, pressing against the window frame. Derek, I asked you to give me time to think. I know, but I can't stand the idea of you spending the night believing things about me that aren't true. Amanda exaggerated everything because she's angry that I ended our relationship. The text messages she showed everyone were taken out of context. And the financial stuff is complicated, but completely legal. Jake positioned himself near the door, effectively blocking our exit route. Chloe, Derek's been beating himself up all evening about not being more upfront with you from the beginning. But he loves you, and love means being willing to work through difficulties together. The third groomsman, whose intimidating physical presence was clearly intentional, crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. Plus, think about your family's reaction tonight. Everyone who knows you best thinks you should give Derek another chance. Maybe you should listen to people who have more life experience. I realized they weren't here for a conversation. This was an intervention designed to pressure Chloe into compliance while she was emotionally vulnerable and isolated. They'd waited until the family meeting was over and our relatives had left, knowing she'd be most susceptible to manipulation when she was alone and exhausted. Derek moved closer again, reaching out to touch Chloe's arm. Baby, I know today was scary, but we can get past this. We can postpone the wedding for a few weeks, get some couples counseling, and start fresh. Your parents are right that canceling completely would be a huge waste of money and would hurt a lot of people who've invested in our relationship. Chloe jerked away from his touch, and I could see her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Don't touch me right now. Chloe, please. You're letting fear make your decisions instead of love. Amanda is a mentally unstable woman who's trying to destroy our happiness because she can't accept that I chose you instead of her. Don't let her win by throwing away everything we've built together. The manipulation was so blatant that I wanted to shout, but I could see that Chloe was becoming overwhelmed by the combination of Derek's presence, the confined space, and the pressure from three men who were significantly larger and stronger than either of us. Her breathing became even more labored, and she pressed her hand against her chest, like she couldn't get enough air. "I can't breathe," she whispered. Derek stepped forward again, apparently interpreting her distress as a sign that she was reconsidering his proposal. "It's okay, baby. You're just having an anxiety attack because you're overthinking everything. Once we get married and start our life together, all this drama will be behind us." But Chloe's breathing wasn't improving. If anything, it was getting worse. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, gasping for air and trembling uncontrollably. Her face had gone pale, and she was making small, panicked sounds with each attempted breath. Clissy, I knelt beside her, recognizing the signs of a severe panic attack. "Try to slow your breathing, in through your nose, out through your mouth." Derek crouched down on her other side, still apparently thinking this was something he could talk her through. "See, you're getting yourself all worked up over nothing. This is exactly what Amanda wanted to happen. She wanted to make you so anxious and confused that you'd make a rash decision." Chloe's panic attack worsened at the sound of his voice. She was hyperventilating now, her hands shaking so violently that she couldn't control them. Her lips were starting to turn blue, and I realized this had moved beyond normal anxiety into something potentially dangerous. "Derek, you need to leave right now," I said firmly. "Your presence is making this worse." "I'm not leaving my fiancé when she needs me." But Chloe was beyond being able to communicate verbally. She was making choking sounds as if she couldn't get any air at all, and her whole body was convulsing with the effort to breathe. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I need paramedics at Sunset Ridge Manor immediately. I have a 24-year-old woman experiencing a severe panic attack with breathing difficulties." Derek tried to grab my phone. "You're being dramatic. She's just upset. She doesn't need an ambulance." But by the time the EMTs arrived 12 minutes later, Chloe was barely conscious. They immediately administered oxygen and checked her vital signs while I explained what had been happening. When they loaded her onto a gurney to transport her to the hospital, she was still wearing her wedding dress, still trembling and still unable to speak coherently. As the ambulance pulled away with my sister inside, I realized that the image of Chloe being wheeled out in her bridal gown, gasping for air and surrounded by medical equipment, would probably haunt our family for years. It was the perfect symbol of what happened when people prioritize money and appearances over a young woman's safety and well-being. Derek stood in the parking lot watching the ambulance disappear, finally seeming to understand that his plan to pressure Chloe into compliance had backfired catastrophically. The family who'd voted for him to proceed with the marriage would now have to explain to everyone why the bride had been hospitalized on her wedding day. But somehow, I suspected even this wouldn't be enough to convince them that Derek was the problem, rather than the solution. Portland General Hospital's emergency department at midnight felt surreal after the elaborate wedding venue we'd left behind. Fluorescent lights replaced romantic garden lighting, and the smell of disinfectant overwhelmed any lingering traces of expensive floral arrangements. Chloe lay in bed, 3 of the ER connected to monitors that tracked her heart rate and blood oxygen levels while an IV drip slowly rehydrated her system. Dr. Martinez had explained that severe panic attacks could mimic heart problems, especially when combined with the physical stress of wearing a restrictive dress for 14 hours and not eating since breakfast. They'd given Chloe medication to calm her anxiety and were monitoring her vital signs to ensure everything returned to normal ranges. "The good news is that all her tests are coming back normal," Dr. Martinez told me in the hallway outside her room. "But I'm concerned about what triggered such an extreme response. Has she been under unusual stress lately?" I almost laughed at the understatement, but settled for explaining that she'd discovered her fiancé had been lying about his identity and planning to defraud her family just hours before their scheduled wedding ceremony. "Ah," Dr. Martinez nodded with understanding. "That would certainly qualify as unusual stress." Our parents had arrived at the hospital within an hour of the ambulance call, looking haggard and frightened in a way that suggested the seriousness of Chloe's condition was finally penetrating their denial about the day's events. They sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs near the nurse's station, whispering anxiously and occasionally glancing toward Chloe's room. Around 1 in the morning, while Chloe dozed fitfully under the influence of anti-anxiety medication, I decided to get some air in the hospital parking garage. The cool October night felt refreshing after hours in the sterile hospital environment, and I needed a few minutes alone to process everything that had happened. I was walking between rows of parked cars when I heard footsteps echoing off the concrete walls behind me. Turning around, I saw Derek approaching with his hands raised in what was probably meant to be a non-threatening gesture. "Brianna, wait, I need to talk to you." Every instinct told me to keep walking, but something about his demeanor was different from earlier. Gone was the confident manipulation he'd displayed in the bridal suite. He looked exhausted, defeated, and somehow smaller than he had during the wedding ceremony that morning. "There's nothing to talk about, Derek. You need to stay away from my sister. Please just give me 2 minutes. I need someone to understand what really happened here." Against my better judgment, I stopped walking but kept my distance from him. Maybe it was curiosity about what story he'd tell when he thought no one else could hear, or maybe I wanted to give him enough rope to hang himself with his own words. 2 minutes. Derek ran his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect styling that had survived the entire day's disasters. "Look, I know how everything looks right now. I know Amanda made me sound like some kind of criminal mastermind, and I know finding that stuff in my wallet made things worse. But it's not what you think." "Then explain it." He leaned against a concrete pillar, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely vulnerable rather than calculated. "Amanda was telling the truth about most of it. I do owe money to some dangerous people. I have been gambling, and I did lose way more than I could afford to pay back. And yes, I was looking for someone who could help me get out of the hole I dug for myself." The admission caught me off guard. I'd expected more denials and justifications, not a confession. "So you targeted Chloe specifically because of her family's financial situation?" Derek nodded slowly, staring at the ground rather than meeting my eyes. "I researched your family before I asked her out. I knew your parents owned their house outright. I knew they had good credit and stable jobs, and I figured they'd be willing to help their daughter's husband if he got into financial trouble." Each word made me feel sicker, but I forced myself to keep listening. "The gambling started as just a way to make some quick money to pay off credit card debt, but it spiraled out of control really fast, and before I knew it, I owed $50,000 to people who don't accept payment plans. People who threaten violence. People who do more than threaten." Derek rolled up his sleeve, showing me a bruise on his forearm that looked like it came from someone grabbing him forcefully. "They gave me a deadline to come up with the money, and marrying into a family with assets seemed like my only option." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how calculated and desperate his plan had been. "How many other women have you done this to?" Derek's silence was answer enough, but he eventually spoke up. "Chloe isn't the first person I've dated for financial reasons, but she's the first one I actually developed feelings for, which made everything more complicated." "Complicated how?" "Because by the time I realized I actually cared about her, I was already in too deep with the lies to come clean without losing her. And I couldn't afford to lose her, both because I genuinely loved her and because I still needed access to your family's resources to stay alive." The twisted logic was stunning. Derek had convinced himself that he loved Chloe while simultaneously planning to exploit her family's trust and finances. He'd created a situation where he couldn't be honest without destroying both his relationship and his safety. "So your plan was to marry her, take out loans using her family as collateral, and hope no one noticed?" My plan was to marry her, convince your parents to co-sign some loans to help me start a business, use that money to pay off the gambling debts, and then actually try to build a legitimate life with her. I thought maybe I could make it work for real once the immediate threat was gone. I stared at him, trying to process the delusion required to think that plan could ever succeed. Derek, that's still fraud. Even if you had genuine feelings for Chloe, you were planning to steal money from people who trusted you. I know, he said quietly. I know it's wrong, and I know I'm probably going to face legal consequences once everything comes out. But I need you to understand that my feelings for Chloe were real, even if my reasons for pursuing her weren't. The distinction felt meaningless, given the scope of his deception, but I could see that it mattered to him somehow. What about the other women Amanda mentioned? Are there really other victims? Derek nodded reluctantly. 3 others over the past 2 years. I never married any of them, but I did take money under false pretenses. I always told myself I'd pay them back once I got back on my feet, but it never happened. And the fake identification, I needed different identities to open credit accounts and avoid having the gambling debts traced back to me. It started as a way to buy time, but it became necessary to keep the whole scheme going. I realized I was listening to the confession of someone who had been running increasingly sophisticated cons for years, all to feed a gambling addiction that had spiraled completely out of control. Derek wasn't just a bad boyfriend who'd made some poor choices. He was a career criminal whose addiction had driven him to prey on vulnerable women. You understand that Chloe could have been financially ruined if your plan had worked right, that you could have destroyed her credit, her family's assets, and her entire future. I understand that now, but at the time I was just trying to survive day by day without getting beaten up or killed by people I owed money to. I wasn't thinking clearly about the long-term consequences for anyone else. The hospital parking garage felt cold and eerily quiet as Derek's words echoed off the concrete walls. I looked at this man who'd almost become my brother-in-law, realizing that underneath his handsome exterior and charming personality was someone whose desperation had made him capable of destroying the people who cared about him most. Are you going to tell the police what you just told me? Derek was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing his options. I don't know. Part of me thinks it would be a relief to stop running from everything I've done wrong, but part of me is terrified about what happens next if I confess to everything. What happens next is that you face the consequences of your choices instead of forcing other people to pay the price for your problems. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd met him, Derek looked like someone who understood the gravity of his actions, rather than someone who was primarily concerned with avoiding accountability. You're right. I know you're right. I just don't know if I'm brave enough to do the right thing. I left him standing in the parking garage, wrestling with a conscience he'd apparently been ignoring for years. Whether he chose to confess or continue running, my priority was making sure he never got close enough to hurt Chloe again. But as I walked back toward the hospital entrance, I realized I had his confession recorded on my phone. I'd started recording when he began admitting to deliberately targeting Chloe, and I'd captured his acknowledgement of multiple victims' fake identification and plans to defraud my family. For the first time since receiving that text about watching the wedding online, I felt like I had some control over the situation. The elevator ride back to the 3rd floor felt like ascending from one reality into another. In the parking garage, I'd heard Derek's confession and recorded evidence that could protect not just Chloe, but his other victims as well. In the hospital corridors, my family was still debating whether Derek deserved forgiveness and a second chance. I found them exactly where I'd left them, clustered in uncomfortable chairs near the nurses' station, having what appeared to be a continuation of the family meeting from the venue. Uncle Robert was there along with Aunt Linda, my parents, and surprisingly, Cousin Mark and Rachel, who should have been heading back to their hotel. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw me approaching. "How's Chloe doing?" Mom asked, though her attention seemed more focused on the ongoing family discussion than her daughter's medical condition. "She's stable. The medication is helping with her anxiety, and the doctors expect her to be released in a few hours." Dad nodded briefly, then returned to what was apparently the more pressing issue. "We've been talking about how to handle the situation going forward. Derek's been very understanding about postponing the ceremony, and he's willing to get counseling to work through some of his issues." I stared at him in disbelief. Dad Derek just confessed to deliberately targeting Chloe because he researched our family's financial situation and decided she'd be useful for accessing money to pay his gambling debts. Uncle Robert leaned forward in his chair, his expression skeptical. "Brianna, where exactly did this alleged confession take place?" "In the parking garage 20 minutes ago. He told me he owes $50,000 to dangerous people, that he's been running cons on other women for years, and that he chose Chloe specifically because he thought our family would be willing to help him financially." Aunt Linda shook her head, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used when she thought someone was being dramatic. "Honey, you've been under a lot of stress today. Are you sure you're remembering this conversation accurately? People sometimes hear what they expect to hear when they're upset." The dismissal was exactly what I'd anticipated, which was why I'd been recording. I pulled out my phone and began playing Derek's confession for the group. His voice came through clearly admitting to targeting Chloe, acknowledging multiple victims, and explaining his plan to use our family's assets to pay gambling debts. The change in everyone's expressions was immediate and dramatic. Uncle Robert's legal pad slipped from his hands. Aunt Linda's mouth fell open. Mom grabbed Dad's arm so tightly that he winced. When the recording ended, the hallway was silent, except for the ambient sounds of hospital equipment and distant conversations from other patient rooms. Cousin Mark was the first to speak, his voice shaky. "That's not the same person we talked to earlier. He completely denied all of Amanda's accusations during the family meeting." "Because he was lying during the family meeting," I said. "Everything Amanda said at the ceremony was true. Derek has been running a long-term con on our entire family, and you almost voted to pressure Chloe into marrying a career criminal." Uncle Robert cleared his throat, apparently struggling to reconcile his earlier position with this new evidence. "This certainly changes things significantly. If Derek has been deliberately deceptive about his intentions and his background, then proceeding with the marriage would obviously be inadvisable." The understatement was almost funny if the situation hadn't been so serious. Aunt Linda looked genuinely shaken, her earlier confidence about Derek's potential for rehabilitation completely evaporated. "Robert, that recording mentioned other victims. If he's done this to multiple women, then we're not talking about someone who made mistakes. We're talking about someone who has a pattern of predatory behavior." Dad had been silent during the playback, but now he spoke up with an expression I'd rarely seen from him: genuine remorse. "Brianna, I owe you an apology. You tried to warn us that something was wrong with Derek, and we dismissed your concerns. We were so focused on the money we'd invested and the social complications of canceling that we lost sight of what was actually best for Chloe." The admission meant more to me than I'd expected it would. "And I owe Chloe an even bigger apology," he continued. "We put financial considerations ahead of her safety and well-being. We treated her marriage like a business decision instead of recognizing that she was in danger." Mom wiped tears from her eyes, finally grasping the full scope of what had almost happened. "When I think about how close she came to actually marrying him, if Amanda hadn't spoken up at the ceremony, Derek would have succeeded in whatever he was planning to do to our family." The weight of that realization settled over everyone. Without Amanda's dramatic intervention, Chloe would be legally married to a con artist who'd already been planning to exploit her family's trust and financial resources. The disrupted ceremony had been embarrassing and expensive, but it had also been salvation. Uncle Robert stood up, apparently shifting into problem-solving mode. The question now is what we do with this information. Derek has essentially confessed to multiple felonies, and we have evidence that could protect his other victims as well as preventing him from targeting more women in the future. We call the police, I said without hesitation. We give them the recording and let them investigate the full scope of Derek's criminal activity. Aunt Linda nodded emphatically. Absolutely, and we need to warn the other women he mentioned if we can figure out who they are. They deserve to know that they weren't responsible for what happened to them. For the first time since I'd arrived in Portland, my extended family was unified around a single goal: protecting Chloe and ensuring Derek faced the appropriate consequences for his actions. The transformation from pressuring her to marry him to actively working to have him arrested was dramatic, but it demonstrated how powerful truth could be when people were finally willing to hear it. Rachel, who'd been quiet throughout the discussion, raised a practical concern. What about the money your parents borrowed for the wedding? $40,000 in debt doesn't disappear just because Derek turned out to be a fraud. Dad sighed heavily, apparently having already considered this problem. That's our responsibility to figure out. We made the decision to take out the loan and we'll have to deal with the financial consequences, but at least Chloe won't be trapped in a dangerous marriage to help us avoid those consequences. The shift in priorities was exactly what I'd hoped to see from the beginning. Money was important, but it wasn't more important than their daughter's safety and future. There's one more thing, I said, remembering Derek's mention of the dangerous people he owed money to. Derek said he owes $50,000 to people who've already threatened him with violence. If we're going to involve law enforcement, we might want to consider whether Chloe or our family could be at risk from his creditors. Uncle Robert, who worked in banking and understood financial crime, looked thoughtful. That's a good point. If Derek's gambling debts involve organized crime, then his arrest could potentially create complications for anyone associated with him. We should probably discuss security concerns with the police when we file the report. The reality of Derek's situation was becoming clearer. He wasn't just a con artist targeting vulnerable women. He was someone whose gambling addiction had connected him to dangerous criminal networks, making him potentially hazardous to be around even beyond his fraudulent behavior. Cousin Mark checked his watch, noting that it was nearly 2 a.m. Should we contact the police tonight or wait until tomorrow when Chloe's feeling better? Tonight, I said firmly. Derek is probably planning to leave town now that his scheme has failed. If we wait, we might lose the opportunity to hold him accountable. As if summoned by our conversation, Derek himself appeared at the end of the hallway, apparently having followed me back into the hospital. He walked toward our group with the uncertain gait of someone who knew he was walking into hostile territory but felt like he had no other choice. I've been thinking about our conversation, he said to me, ignoring everyone else, and I've decided you're right. I need to face the consequences of what I've done. Uncle Robert stood up, apparently prepared to handle this confrontation himself. Derek, we've heard the recording of your confession. We know about the gambling debts, the other victims, and your plan to defraud our family. The police are going to be contacted tonight. Derek nodded, looking resigned rather than surprised. I know. That's why I came back. I wanted to turn myself in before you had to call them. Derek's surrender lasted approximately 12 minutes. That's how long it took for Portland Police Detective Maria Santos to arrive, listen to the recorded confession, and discover that Derek Williams was actually Michael Thompson, a person of interest in multiple fraud investigations across 3 states. Detective Santos was a compact woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen enough human deception to recognize it immediately. She listened to my recording. Twice asked Derek for identification that he could no longer provide convincingly, and then made several phone calls that resulted in backup officers arriving within 20 minutes. Mr. Thompson, you're under arrest for identity theft fraud and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Detective Santos announced in the hospital hallway while other patients and visitors stared at the unfolding drama. "You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights echoed through the corridor, I realized that Derek's arrest was happening less than 18 hours after he'd been standing at an altar expecting to marry my sister. The speed of his downfall was almost dizzying, but it also demonstrated how precarious his entire scheme had been. Before the officers escorted Derek away, Detective Santos turned to address our family. "We're going to need statements from all of you, particularly Ms. Patterson, since she was the intended victim. But I can tell you right now that Mr. Thompson is wanted in connection with similar schemes in Washington and California. Your sister is not his first target, and she probably wouldn't have been his last." Dad looked pale as the implications sank in. "How many other women has he done this to?" "We're still investigating, but we have reports from at least 6 other victims over the past 3 years. The pattern is always the same. He identifies women from financially stable families, builds relationships with them, and then attempts to gain access to family assets through marriage or other means." Mom grabbed my arm, her voice shaking. "Brianna, if you hadn't been there tonight, if you hadn't gotten him to confess, Chloe would have married him tomorrow morning, and by next week, he would have been working on accessing your home equity retirement accounts and credit lines." Detective Santos finished. "Based on what we know about his other cases, he typically extracts between $50,000 and $100,000 before his victims realize what's happening." The detective handed us business cards and explained the process for filing formal complaints and providing evidence. She also warned us that Derek's arrest might trigger contact from his gambling creditors, who wouldn't care that their debtor was in jail. "Has your family received any threatening phone calls or messages?" she asked. When we confirmed that we hadn't, she advised us to be cautious about sharing personal information and to report any suspicious contact immediately. After the police left with Derek in custody, our family stood in the hospital hallway processing what had just occurred. The man who'd been standing at the altar in a tuxedo that morning was now wearing handcuffs and facing potential prison time for crimes spanning multiple years and states. Uncle Robert was the first to articulate what everyone was thinking. "We almost voted to pressure Chloe into marrying a career criminal who was actively wanted by law enforcement in 3 states. The guilt in his voice was obvious, and it was shared by everyone who'd participated in that family meeting at the venue. Aunt Linda sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs, looking exhausted. "When I think about what I said to that poor girl about accepting people as they are and helping them become better, I was asking her to rehabilitate someone who was planning to steal from us and then disappear. The recognition was painful but necessary. Good intentions and family loyalty had nearly enabled a predator to succeed in his scheme." Dad addressed me directly, his voice thick with emotion. "Brianna, I don't know how to apologize adequately for what happened today. We excluded you from the wedding, dismissed your concerns about Derek, and then blamed you for being unsupportive when you were the only one seeing the situation clearly. The acknowledgement meant everything to me, not because I needed vindication, but because it represented hope that our family relationships could be repaired and improved. We need to completely rethink how we make family decisions," Mom added. "Today proved that money and social expectations can make us lose sight of what actually matters." Cousin Mark nodded emphatically. "And we need to trust that the people we love are capable of making their own decisions about their lives. Voting on whether Chloe should marry Derek was completely inappropriate, even if Derek had turned out to be legitimate." The conversation was interrupted by a nurse informing us that Chloe was awake and asking to see family. We made our way to her room, where she was sitting up in bed, looking more alert than she had since the wedding ceremony disaster began. "I heard police officers in the hallway," she said. "What happened?" I sat in the chair beside her bed and explained everything: Derek's confession, the recording his arrest, and the discovery that he was wanted in multiple states for similar crimes. Chloe listened without interrupting her expression, cycling through various emotions as she processed the information. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes. So I wasn't being paranoid or oversensitive when I felt like something was wrong with him. You were being smart, I told her. Your instincts were trying to protect you from someone who was systematically lying about everything that mattered. Dad stepped forward, looking like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to begin. Chloe, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. We pressured you to ignore your instincts, dismissed your concerns, and prioritize money over your safety. We failed you as parents, and I'm gonna spend a very long time figuring out how to make that right. Mom moved to the other side of Chloe's bed, tears streaming down her face. We were so focused on giving you a perfect wedding that we forgot to pay attention to whether you were actually happy with the person you were marrying. We treated you like a project to be completed instead of a person whose feelings and safety mattered most. Chloe reached for both their hands, her own voice emotional but steady. I need you to understand that I almost made the biggest mistake of my life today because I was trying to live up to your expectations instead of trusting my own judgment. We can't ever let that happen again. The hospital room became a space for honest conversation that should have happened months earlier. Uncle Robert apologized for treating her marriage like a business decision. Aunt Linda acknowledged that her advice about accepting Derek's flaws had been dangerous rather than wise. Even Cousin Mark admitted that his complaints about wasted vacation time had prioritized his convenience over her well-being. What happens now? Chloe asked when everyone had spoken. Detective Santos had explained that there would be court proceedings, victim impact statements, and probably media attention once Derek's arrest became public. But beyond the legal process, we faced the bigger question of how to rebuild family relationships that had been damaged by years of dysfunctional dynamics. Now we figure out how to be a family that actually supports each other instead of just going through the motions, I said, and we make sure this never happens again to anyone. Outside Chloe's hospital window, dawn was beginning to break over Portland. It had been exactly 24 hours since she'd started her wedding day, with hope and excitement about marrying the man she loved. Now she was ending that same day in a hospital bed, having survived an attempt by a career criminal to defraud her family and destroy her future. But for the first time in years, our entire family was being honest with each other about what had gone wrong and what needed to change. It wasn't the wedding day anyone had planned, but it might turn out to be exactly what we all needed. 3 days later, I sat in Detective Santos's office at the Portland Police Bureau downtown, providing additional details for what had become a multi-jurisdictional investigation into Michael Thompson's criminal activities. The small conference room was filled with file folders, printed emails, and evidence bags containing items seized from Derek's hotel room after his arrest. We've been able to identify 7 confirmed victims across Oregon, Washington, and California. Detective Santos explained, spreading photographs across the table. The earliest case we can document goes back 3 years, but we suspect he's been running variations of this scheme for much longer. The photos showed women who looked remarkably similar to Chloe Young, middle class, with families who appeared financially stable and emotionally invested in their daughter's happiness. Derek hadn't been randomly targeting victims. He'd been specifically seeking women who fit a particular profile that made them vulnerable to his approach. What's happening with the charges? I asked. He's being held on multiple felony counts, including identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and violation of interstate commerce laws. The federal prosecutor is considering RICO charges since his activities crossed state lines and involved organized criminal enterprises. Detective Santos pulled out a folder labeled Thompson Michael, Financial Analysis, and showed me spreadsheets detailing the scope of his crimes. We estimate he stole approximately $400,000 from his previous victims over the past 3 years. Some of the women lost their life savings. One lost her house. Another had her credit destroyed so badly that she's been unable to qualify for apartments or car loans. The human cost of Derek's gambling addiction was staggering. He hadn't just been stealing money, he'd been systematically destroying the financial futures of women who'd trusted him with their hearts and their family's security. The good news is that most of his victims are cooperating with the investigation, she continued. Your recording was the breakthrough we needed because it provided admissions that we can use to build cases for all the other incidents. I thought about the phone call I'd received the previous evening from a woman named Jennifer in Seattle, one of Derek's earlier victims who'd gotten my contact information from the police. She'd wanted to thank me for stopping Derek before he could disappear with another family's assets the way he'd done with hers. He told me the same stories about business opportunities and temporary financial difficulties, Jennifer had said. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd taken $30,000 from my parents' retirement account and vanished completely. I blamed myself for years thinking I should have been smarter or more careful. Detective Santos interrupted my thoughts by pulling out another set of documents. There's something else you should know about. Derek's gambling debts weren't just to random bookmakers. He was involved with a criminal organization that operates out of Nevada and California. They've been using people like Derek to identify and target affluent families for various financial crimes. The revelation was chilling. Derek hadn't just been a lone con artist driven by addiction. He'd been part of a larger criminal network that specialized in exploiting vulnerable families. Are we in danger from these people? We don't think so. Derek's arrest actually benefits them because it removes someone who'd become a liability. They typically abandon associates who get caught rather than risk exposure by seeking revenge. Detective Santos closed the files and looked at me directly. I want you to understand how significant your actions were. Derek was escalating his criminal behavior with each new victim. If he'd succeeded in marrying your sister and accessing your family's assets, we believe he would have moved on to more sophisticated schemes involving money laundering and organized fraud rings. What would have happened to Chloe? Based on the pattern with his other victims, he probably would have drained your family's accounts within 6 months and then disappeared, leaving your sister with massive debts, destroyed credit, and no legal recourse since she would have been complicit in applying for loans and credit lines. The detective's words reinforced how close we'd come to a catastrophe that would have affected our family for decades. After leaving the police station, I drove to the small apartment Chloe had been staying in since being released from the hospital. She'd decided not to return to the house she'd shared with Derek even temporarily, and was staying with a friend while figuring out her next steps. I found her sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by legal documents, insurance paperwork, and what appeared to be financial statements. She looked tired but determined, working through the practical details of disentangling her life from someone who'd been systematically deceiving her for months. How did the police meeting go? She asked. I told her about the 7 confirmed victims, the federal charges, and the criminal organization Derek had been connected to. With each detail, Chloe's expression became more serious as she grasped the full scope of what she'd escaped. 7 other women, she said quietly. 7 other families who went through what we almost went through. She picked up a piece of paper from the pile on the table. I've been going through my credit reports and bank statements like Detective Santos suggested. Derek was even more active than we realized. She showed me printouts revealing 3 credit cards opened in her name over the past 4 months, all with substantial balances charged for things she'd never purchased, casino cash advances, expensive electronics, and airline tickets to cities she'd never visited. My credit score dropped from 740 to 512 in 6 months, she said. I had no idea this was happening because the statements were being sent to an address Derek controlled. The systematic nature of the identity theft was breathtaking. Derek had essentially been living a parallel financial life using Chloe's personal information while maintaining his facade as a loving boyfriend planning their future together. Oh, the bank says it will take at least a year to dispute all the fraudulent charges and repair the damage to my credit, she continued. But they also said I'm lucky we discovered it when we did, because he was apparently in the process of applying for a mortgage using my information and Dad's financial details as collateral. I stared at the paperwork, realizing that Derek had been moving toward the final phase of his scheme, using the wedding as an opportunity to gain legal access to larger family assets through joint financial accounts and loan applications. Chloe, what you went through was not your fault. Derek was running a sophisticated criminal operation that had fooled multiple women before you. She nodded, but I could see she was still processing the emotional impact of learning how extensively she'd been manipulated. The hardest part is realizing that almost nothing about our relationship was real. The restaurants he took me to, the gifts he bought me, the apartment we shared. It was all funded by stolen money and fake credit accounts. Even the engagement ring was purchased using a credit card opened in my name without my knowledge. The violation was profound, not just financial theft, but the complete fabrication of a romantic relationship designed to facilitate that theft. But there is some good news, she said, pulling out a different set of documents. Detective Santos connected me with a victim advocate who specializes in identity theft recovery. She's helping me navigate the legal process and connect with other women who've been through similar experiences. Chloe's phone rang and she answered with a tone that had become familiar over the past few days, professional, cautious, but determined. Yes, this is Chloe Patterson. Yes, I can hold for Detective Santos. While she waited on hold, she explained that the detective had been calling regularly with updates about Derek's case and information about additional victims who were coming forward. Hello, Detective Santos. What are you serious? Chloe's expression changed dramatically as she listened to whatever news the detective was sharing. Her eyes widened, then she looked directly at me with an expression of complete shock. Yes, I understand. Thank you for letting me know immediately. She hung up the phone and sat staring at it for several seconds before speaking. They found Derek's computer and cell phone records. He wasn't just targeting random women. He was working with the criminal organization to specifically identify families like ours through social media research, public records, and financial databases. The revelation was the final piece of understanding how calculated and extensive Derek's deception had been. Detective Santos said they found files on over 40 families across the western United States. We were just one target in a much larger criminal enterprise that's been operating for years. 2 weeks after Derek's arrest, Chloe and I stood in the same gardens at Sunset Ridge Manor where her wedding ceremony had been supposed to take place. But instead of wedding guests, the space was filled with family friends and several women who'd traveled to Portland specifically for what Chloe had decided to call her Freedom Celebration. The transformation of the venue was remarkable. Where elaborate floral arrangements had once created a romantic fairy tale atmosphere, we now had simple decorations that emphasized community and healing rather than perfection and performance. Round tables encouraged conversation rather than forcing people to face forward toward an altar, and the overall feeling was warm and welcoming rather than formal and intimidating. Jennifer had driven down from Seattle with her sister, bringing with her the divorce attorney who'd helped her navigate the legal aftermath of Derek's theft. Maria, another victim from California, had flown up with her parents who wanted to meet the family that had finally stopped Derek's criminal activity. Even Amanda, the woman whose dramatic intervention had saved Chloe from marrying Derek, was present, having driven over from Eastern Oregon, where she'd been staying with relatives. I can't believe you turned this into something positive, Jennifer said as we stood near the same archway where Derek had been arrested less than 3 weeks earlier. When I found out what he'd done to me, I just wanted to hide and pretend it never happened. Chloe looked elegant in a simple blue dress that emphasized her natural beauty rather than trying to create a fantasy princess image. She donated her wedding dress to a non-profit organization that provided formal wear for women re-entering the workforce after domestic violence situations. I realized that hiding wouldn't help anyone, Chloe explained. Derek succeeded with me partly because I felt isolated and unsure of myself. If sharing my story helps other women recognize the warning signs or feel less alone, then something good can come from something terrible. The celebration had attracted local media attention not as a source of entertainment about a disrupted wedding, but as an educational story about financial fraud and family manipulation. A reporter from the Portland Tribune had interviewed several attendees about the warning signs they'd missed and the importance of trusting instincts when something feels wrong in a relationship. Mom and Dad had spent the past 2 weeks in intensive family therapy, working with a counselor who specialized in dysfunctional family dynamics and financial enmeshment. They'd made remarkable progress in understanding how their favoritism and financial pressure had created dangerous vulnerabilities for both Chloe and me. We're learning that our children are not investments or projects to be managed. Dad had explained to the family counselor during a session I'd attended via video call from Denver. They're independent adults whose happiness and safety should be our primary concern, regardless of how much money we've spent or what other people might think. The therapy was revealing patterns that had existed for decades, treating love as conditional on achievement, using financial support as a tool for control, and prioritizing family image over individual well-being. Understanding these patterns was the first step toward changing them. Uncle Robert approached our group near the garden archway, carrying a plate of food from the catered lunch that had replaced the original wedding reception. "I've been talking to some of the other victims," he said, "and I'm amazed by how similar all of your experiences were. Derek really was following a specific playbook for targeting families like ours." Amanda overheard and joined the conversation, sharing details about Derek's background that she'd uncovered through her own investigation after he'd victimized her. "He studied psychology in college before dropping out to pursue gambling full-time," she explained. "Everything he did was designed to exploit specific emotional vulnerabilities. The rushed engagement, the pressure to keep relationship problems private, the way he isolated Chloe from people who might have asked difficult questions. It was all calculated manipulation." Maria nodded emphatically. "That's exactly what happened with my family. Derek convinced me that my parents would disapprove of him because they were overprotective, so I stopped telling them about problems in our relationship. By the time I realized he was stealing from them, I felt too guilty and embarrassed to ask for help." The conversation was illuminating for everyone present, including family members who were learning how sophisticated emotional manipulation could be when practiced by someone with experience and specific training. Chloe had invited local college students studying psychology and criminal justice to attend the celebration as an educational opportunity. She'd partnered with a nonprofit organization called Financial Fraud Awareness to create materials that would help other families recognize and avoid similar schemes. "The most important thing I learned," Chloe told the group, "is that isolation is what makes these scams possible. Derek worked hard to make me feel like I couldn't trust my own judgment and that my family wouldn't understand or support me if I shared my concerns." She gestured toward the assembled group of family friends and fellow survivors. "This celebration is about the opposite of isolation. It's about community honesty and supporting each other through difficult experiences rather than pretending everything is perfect." As the afternoon progressed, I watched Chloe move through the crowd with confidence and grace, sharing her story when appropriate and listening supportively when other survivors shared theirs. The transformation from the panicked bride in a hospital bed to this self-possessed young woman advocating for others was remarkable. Around 4 o'clock, Chloe asked for everyone's attention and stood near the decorated archway to address the group. 3 weeks ago, I was supposed to get married in this exact spot to someone I thought I loved and trusted. Instead, I discovered that I'd been targeted by a career criminal who saw my family as a source of money, rather than seeing me as a person worthy of genuine love and respect. The audience listened intently as she continued. I want to thank everyone who helped save me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Amanda, who had the courage to speak up even though she knew it would be painful and embarrassing for everyone involved. Brianna, who dropped everything to drive here from Denver and who had the wisdom to record Derek's confession. My parents, who are working hard to change patterns that put me at risk. And all of the other survivors who've shared their experiences to help me feel less alone. She paused, looking around at faces that represented genuine care rather than financial investment. But most importantly, I want to thank myself for trusting my instincts, even when everyone else was telling me to ignore them. I knew something was wrong with Derek months before the wedding, but I let other people convince me that my feelings were invalid. The crowd applauded as Chloe concluded her remarks. From now on, I'm committing to trusting my own judgment, building relationships based on honesty rather than fantasy, and surrounding myself with people who value my well-being more than their own convenience. After the formal program ended, the celebration continued with conversations, shared meals, and connections between people who understood the specific challenges of surviving sophisticated emotional manipulation. Several attendees exchanged contact information to maintain supportive relationships, and the nonprofit organization collected donations to fund educational programs about financial fraud. As the sun set over the same gardens where Chloe's fairy tale wedding had collapsed into nightmare, I realized that the day had become something much more valuable than any wedding could have been: a celebration of survival growth and genuine community, rather than performance and pretense. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, I received a text message that made me smile in a way I hadn't expected when this entire story began. It was from Chloe, who'd moved to Denver 3 weeks earlier and was settling into an apartment just 15 minutes from mine. Coffee tomorrow morning, I have news to share, and I want to tell my big sister first. The phrase, big sister, carried weight it had never held before. Throughout our childhood and young adulthood, we'd been positioned as competitors for parental attention and resources, rather than allies navigating life's challenges together. Derek's criminal scheme had accidentally created the crisis that forced our family to confront those dysfunctional patterns and build something healthier in their place. I met Chloe at a small coffee shop near her new workplace, where she'd been hired as a victim advocate for a nonprofit organization specializing in financial fraud recovery. The job utilized her personal experience while giving her professional skills to help other survivors navigate the legal and emotional aftermath of sophisticated scams. "You look happy," I observed as she sat down across from me with her usual order, oat milk latte with an extra shot of espresso. "I am happy," she said, and for the first time since I'd known her as an adult, the statement sounded completely genuine rather than performative. "I have something I want to show you." She pulled out her phone and opened a news article from the Denver Post titled, "Oregon Identity Theft Ring Dismantled Following Multi-State Investigation." The story detailed Derek's conviction and sentencing to 8 years in federal prison, along with the arrest of 6 other people involved in the criminal organization that had been targeting families across the western United States. Derek pleaded guilty to all charges rather than going to trial, Chloe explained. His cooperation with investigators led to the conviction of the entire network, including the people who were threatening him over gambling debts. The article mentioned that victim restitution would be handled through federal programs designed to help survivors of organized financial crimes, and that Derek's cooperation had been motivated partly by genuine remorse for the harm he'd caused. Did you ever think about visiting him in prison or communicating with him during the legal process? I asked. Chloe considered the question carefully before answering. I thought about it especially during the early weeks when I was still processing everything that had happened. Part of me wanted closure or some kind of explanation that would help me understand how someone could fake an entire relationship so convincingly. She took a sip of her latte and continued. But my therapist helped me realize that seeking closure from Derek would be giving him continued power over my emotional healing. The closure I needed had to come from within myself and from rebuilding my life based on my own values and judgment, rather than his manipulation. The wisdom in that decision reflected how much personal growth Chloe had experienced over the past 6 months. She'd gone from someone who doubted her own instincts to someone who trusted herself completely, even when that trust required difficult choices. What about mom and dad? How are they doing with the financial recovery? Chloe's expression grew more serious, though not troubled. They're making progress on paying off the loan they took for the wedding, but more importantly, they're making progress on understanding why they made such poor decisions in the first place. Family therapy has been really challenging for them because it's forcing them to confront patterns they've maintained for decades. Our parents had undergone a complete transformation in their approach to family relationships. The $40,000 loss from the wedding expenses had been painful, but it had also served as an expensive lesson about the dangers of prioritizing appearances and financial investments over their children's actual well-being. Dad told me last week that the money they lost on my wedding was the best money they ever spent because it taught them what really matters before they made even bigger mistakes with both of our lives, Chloe said. The comment reflected a level of self-awareness from our father that would have been impossible to imagine before Derek's arrest. Losing money had been less important than gaining perspective on what kind of parents and family members they wanted to be. They're planning to visit next month, and they want to treat both of us to dinner as equals, rather than as the responsible daughter and the favored daughter, she continued. It's a small thing, but it represents a huge shift in how they think about our relationships. The change in family dynamics had been one of the most positive outcomes of the entire crisis. Instead of competing for parental approval and resources, Chloe and I had developed our first genuine adult sisterhood based on mutual respect and support rather than comparison and favoritism. I have something else to share, Chloe said, her voice taking on a tone of nervous excitement. I've been dating someone for the past 2 months. My first instinct was protective concern. Was it too soon? Had she fully processed her experience with Derek? But looking at Chloe's confident expression, I realized that she was capable of making her own decisions about her romantic life, and that my role was to support rather than second-guess her choices. Tell me about him. His name is Marcus, and he's a teacher at the elementary school near my office. We met when I was doing a presentation about internet safety and financial fraud prevention for parents and teachers. She showed me a photo on her phone of a man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, dressed casually in a way that suggested comfort with himself rather than image management. What I like most about him is that he's completely himself from the beginning. He's not trying to impress me or convince me of anything. He's just honest about who he is and what he wants, and he encourages me to be equally honest rather than trying to be whoever he might want me to be. The contrast with Derek was obvious and encouraging. Where Derek had been charming but calculating, Marcus appeared to be authentic and straightforward. He knows about everything that happened with Derek, and his response was to ask how he could support me rather than trying to convince me that I should move past my experience or not let Derek ruin future relationships. Chloe continued. He understands that what happened to me was serious and that trust has to be built gradually through consistent behavior rather than romantic gestures. The maturity in Chloe's approach to this new relationship demonstrated how much she'd learned about healthy relationship dynamics and her own worth as a person deserving of genuine respect and care. "I'm not in a hurry to get married or move in together or make any major commitments," she said. "I'm just enjoying getting to know someone who values honesty and treats me like an equal partner rather than a prize to be won or a resource to be accessed." We spent the next hour talking about her work, her new friendships in Denver, and her plans for continuing education in victim advocacy. Chloe had transformed a traumatic experience into professional purpose, using her personal understanding of manipulation and recovery to help other survivors rebuild their lives. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Chloe reached across the table and took my hand. "Brianna, I need you to know that you saved my life by coming to Portland that night and refusing to let everyone pressure me into making a terrible decision. But more than that, you showed me what real family support looks like. You put my well-being ahead of social expectations, financial considerations, and family pressure." Her words carried emotional weight that surprised both of us. I spent years thinking that love meant accepting whatever treatment I received and being grateful for attention even when that attention came with conditions and expectations. Watching you stand up for me when no one else would taught me that real love sometimes means saying no, setting boundaries, and protecting people even when they can't protect themselves. The lesson applied to much more than romantic relationships. It was about recognizing manipulation in all its forms and having the courage to prioritize truth and safety over comfort and convenience. What I learned from almost marrying Derek is that isolation makes us vulnerable to people who want to exploit us, but genuine community makes us stronger and safer, Chloe concluded. The difference between Derek and Marcus is that Derek tried to separate me from people who might question his behavior, while Marcus encourages me to maintain strong relationships with family and friends who can offer perspective and support. As we walked to our cars, I reflected on how completely our family dynamics had changed over the past 6 months. We'd gone from a family that prioritized appearances and financial investments to one that valued honesty, individual agency, and genuine mutual support. The wedding that never happened had taught us that real family love doesn't mean enabling poor decisions or prioritizing money over safety. It means having difficult conversations, setting appropriate boundaries, and supporting each other's growth, even when that growth requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths. Most importantly, we'd learned that excluding someone from important events or decisions based on inconvenience or discomfort often means excluding the very person whose perspective could prevent disaster. My exclusion from Chloe's wedding had been intended to eliminate complications, but my inclusion in her crisis had been essential for her survival and recovery. Now, as Chloe built her new life in Denver based on authentic relationships and personal strength, I realized that being excluded from the wrong wedding had led to inclusion in something much more valuable, a family built on respect, honesty, and genuine care rather than performance competition and financial enmeshment. The text message that had started this entire story, "Watch your sister's wedding online," had been meant to minimize my importance and participation in family events. Instead, it had accidentally created the circumstances that allowed me to protect my sister and help our family build healthier patterns for the future. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to watch from the sidelines when someone you care about is making a dangerous mistake. And sometimes being excluded from the wrong celebration leads to inclusion in exactly the right community of people who value truth, safety, and genuine connection over convenience and appearances. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where trusting your instincts saved you or someone you love from making a terrible mistake? Or maybe you've experienced family dynamics where financial pressure or social expectations made it hard to prioritize what actually mattered most. Your stories could help other people recognize similar patterns in their own lives and feel less alone in navigating difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help other people find it and consider subscribing for more stories about family relationships, personal growth, and finding the courage to choose authenticity over convenience. Share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of trusting their instincts and building genuine community rather than accepting manipulation disguised as love. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you deserve relationships built on respect, honesty, and genuine care. Take care of yourselves and remember that sometimes the most difficult conversations lead to the most meaningful connections.